spiritual, moral, and ethical codes of practice.
Most hip-hop artists and athletes are not role models.
There's a whole spectrum of black athletes, but troublemakers get the publicity and consequently tend to be negative role models within our community.
When you have a particular power, there is some responsibility that comes with that power. If it's rejected, then it can be used very recklessly.
An athlete doesn't necessarily have to be in a child's life in order to be that role model. How they inspire or the activities that they get involved in should be activities that children can see and identify with.
I don't know where I would be if it wasn't for the nurturing of my parents. And I lost my parents at an early age, but I always remember my mother was always there, my father was always there to be the role models for me, to show me a hard work ethic.
It's difficult for parents to be role models to their own kids, but parents can provide good discipline and good measures and be better role models for somebody else's kids.
None of us are disconnected from each other. We all have to be willing to share the repercussions of reckless role models.
The more that we cultivate role models and really identify how they inspire people, the better off African Americans will be.
Some say that hip hop has produced bad role models.
I think hip hop is a job for people that sing and rap. If a rapper decides he wants to be Will Smith and take on a persona that's a little more friendly to what society deems to be friendly, that's fine. But Mr. Hunter said he represented an artist earlier named Too Short. Notoriously, Too Short has records that we know what their content were, but he's a father, he's a good man. It should not be every rapper is considered a role model just simply because of the fact that they are in the public eye.
What's the difference between artists today and artists 30 years ago?
I think the only difference is that they get a much more publicity than they got before. The media follows them. It's very easy for a guy to blow up, to become extremely successful. Black artists today, unlike 20, 30 years ago, James Brown even, I think that his appeal was exclusively in the black community. Today, the black artists cross over, and I think the overall impact on culture in general is pretty significant.
Sometimes the role models that people look up to reflect what they are. A lot of what we both most relate to is what's most like us. And then we get mad about it. To say that the hip hop is more explicit, I mean, my mother thought "Let's Get It On" by Marvin Gaye was too explicit. I mean,
between the sheets by the
right,
you know,
exactly.
Like,
Right.
Well, you could take it back to Robert Johnson, Screaming Jay Hawkins and all that
Right.
when they used to perform. Everybody thought that they were pretty vulgar.
But I think you make a good point. The media didn't blow them up as much because they weren't in white newspapers. See, the hip hop artists had the gossip columns every day. Black artists in those days couldn't make those shows. If you wasn't Judy Garland, you wasn't in the gossip column.
But I think also you have to understand that the way the media portrays the hip hop artists, it has a lot to do with how they generally portray black males and females.
Right.
And so it's just a carryover, that's all.
hip-hop artists tend to be the microcosm for what the black man is. Right. So when somebody like myself or somebody like him or yourself or Mr. Sharpton come out and become successful, we're exceptions.
Right.
I watched Oprah the other day and she had a special tribute to Mr. Johnson, who started the Ebony. Okay. Now he was successful, he did a lot for the black community. But then what about the other Mr. Johnson who had the chain of liquor stores for the past 30 years and helped feed his family and send his kids to school? Is he not a role model because he had liquor stores in the hood?
Oh, there's no question that he was a role model, a positive role model.
But part of what he did was introduce negativity into our community. So did he really introduce it or did he exploit it?
He ended up replacing other folk who would have been in the community but for him.
But you have people that would say he was putting poison in the community.
He raises good points because I think we have different standards for different people. We impose things on us that we don't impose on others. Like if you are shrewd and you're savvy as an entrepreneur, businessman, there ain't much difference between what Don King and Donald Trump do. At all. But it's how it is perceived and reported.
No, I think it's even different if you look at yourself. When you get on the TV and you elocute, what the white media will say that you speak like a preacher, and the reality is you are an orator, but they choose to characterize you as a preacher instead because that tends to sublimate or push down, your importance.
If you're dealing in a world that the media still is largely controlled by whites, they see it from an alien point of view and they don't understand what they're looking at. Rather than to say they don't understand it or that they're intimidated by it, they're gonna make it negative. I remember when Reverend Jackson was running for president and he told a story that he was riding in a boat and he looked over and he saw the Pope was on the boat and the boat started sinking. And he stepped out of his boat and he walked on the water and he walked over to the Pope and he picked the Pope up in his arms and he walked back on the water and put him safely in his boat. Newspaper the next day came out, Jesse can't swim. So no matter what you do, if you walk on water, they're gonna find a way to do you in.